with every job, I try to learn something that I didn't know before, and it helps prepare you for opportunities in the future. You never know when that one little thing you learn is going to become incredibly valuable for some opportunity in the future.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone. Well, my guest today has been the worldwide polio eradication and senior technical advisor in health and child survival for USAID for the past 25 years. For most of us, polio is an historical issue, but in other parts of the world, it's still very much a threat. So let's hear public health expert Ellyn Ogden tell that story. I am really excited today to be having a conversation with Ellyn Ogden, who has been a fierce frontline combatant in the war against a number of infectious diseases over the years, especially polio. And it's really an interesting story that we're going to hear. Ellyn, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Randy, I'm delighted to tell my story. The views here are my own.
And I know you just got back into the U.S. from Nigeria. Quick question, what were you doing over there this time?
Thanks for asking. I was over there looking at their polio eradication outbreak response activities in Abuja, up in Kano State as well. So I had a great chance to talk to the vaccinators, supervisors, check out the cold chain and see what's happening with the vaccine, listen to people's concerns about vaccine hesitancy, and made some recommendations back for improvement.
Fabulous. So, and how do you think they're doing? Are they going to make polio go away?
Well, if you're in polio eradication, you're always an optimist. We've been at this for 30 years, and we continue to see progress. There have been setbacks, but you keep working the problem and keep trying harder and understanding what's motivating people to get vaccinated or where the obstacles are in getting vaccines out to children. And we have, consistently overcome all of those obstacles.
Well, we're going to get more into the details of that a little bit later, but as we always do, Ellyn, I want to start with your origin story. And as I look over your bio, I noticed that in your early life, you actually spent some time as a nursing assistant, working around ICUs and CCUs and emergency rooms and whatnot. And it made me wonder if at that time in your life you had an interest in becoming a practitioner of some sort, either a physician or a nurse or whatever, or what was in your head at that time in your teenage years?
Well, my first interest in things both medical and international started when I was about 7 years old.
Wow.
I started hearing about smallpox eradication. And it was about the same time I started hearing about the UN. And I asked questions. My mother was a nurse. My dad worked internationally for IBM and really became very curious about how diseases spread in populations, sort of what we could do to make it better. I mean, my very young 7-year-old mind thought, oh, I could be a doctor and go out and help people and prevent diseases. And
that's pretty profound for a 7-year-old.
It was an epiphany back then, but I was just so excited about it. And throughout my younger years, I did try to travel. I studied a lot of the sciences. I studied international relations. My undergrad degree is in international relations with a minor in pre-med.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that, and again to help myself and our audience get a little focus. When you matriculated at Tulane with that international relations degree in mind, did you have a plan for what it was going to look like, or did that come later?
There was actually an important thing that happened a little before then. I actually started undergraduate at Emory in Atlanta. I did.
Uh-huh.
And I was a pre-med major and an international relations minor. And I ended up needing money and took a year off. And that's when I did a lot of the work in hospitals. That's when I worked as a nursing assistant, ICU, CCU, also drug and alcohol rehab for a little bit. And ended up reapplying to school and ended up at Tulane. And I was signing up for courses as a junior, my first courses as a junior at Tulane. And I'm flipping through the course catalog and seeing all of the sciences, all of the international relations courses, which was great. But then in the back of the book is this little thing called the School of Public Health. And I started reading the courses that were being offered there. And I had never been exposed to a School of Public Health before. Wasn't even aware. It was before the undergraduate programs in international health and public health were being offered.
So you were not even aware that Tulane was one of the most respected public health universities on the planet at that time?
That is correct. I went there really to further in pre-med and international relations. And in that moment, I switched majors and wanted to be the international relations major, pre-med minor, with the idea of going to public health school for international health and epidemiology.
What a happy accident.
I know. Just flipping through the catalog, I was sitting on the floor in my dorm room.
What was your picture? What was the picture in your head at that point of what a career in international relations would look like?
I had a vision of walking around in sort of remote villages, talking to people, and I knew about smallpox, so I had this vision of a bifurcated needle and going up to people and just asking if they wanted vaccination. It was a very simplified view of what I imagined.
So the dream obviously had a way to go before maturity, and I'm gathering just by looking at your bio, once you had your degree in hand, that was about the time that you embarked on your service in the Peace Corps. Is that right?
That's true. It actually, one of the things I learned about international health is you actually have to have experience. And in order, it's a chicken and egg. How do you get experience if you need to be working to pay your loans and student debt? So I had never had the opportunity to work overseas, but yet knew how important it was. And in this time in my graduate period, I met my husband, and we decided that the best way for both of us was to join the Peace Corps. I would get international experience. He would also get some experience. He loves to travel. And we would come back to the DC area, and he would look for a job in his field, and I would have the experience needed to look for the job in my field.
That's a great plan.
Yeah. It took us about 2 years to get placed in Peace Corps as a married couple, both with master's degrees by that point. And we were in Papua New Guinea on a remote island. And I was running the provincial disease control program, and mostly TB, leprosy, STDs, and various outbreaks of things coming along. We had no money. We had no drugs. The people I was working with barely had a high school education, but that was the health system. And it taught me a lot about how to work in a lower income country with limited resources, how to engage with people in the community, how to provide health promotion and messaging, and to really understand what it was like to do service delivery in those kinds of settings. It was groundbreaking for me.
Yeah, I bet it was. And I'm wondering if after your Peace Corps training, were you sort of given the admonishment that now we have told you how to do your job, go out there and do it? Or were you aware that you were going to be totally dependent on your own resourcefulness when you got there?
We had a little bit of support, but pretty much we knew we were going to be on our own when we were out there. And this was all pre-cell phones and
Oh, yes.
and everything. So we were very isolated, and you just had to be resourceful and make do with what you had.
And I bet that was, to say the least, a valuable part of your education leading up to what would become a really stellar career for you. And I'm interested in that next step. Tell us the story of your connection with USAID and what happens from there.
When I came back from Papua New Guinea, my husband and I moved back to the Washington area because that's where a lot of the international jobs are in public health. It's grown since then, but it's still really the hub of where things are happening. And I was in my husband's office actually writing up my resume on an old typewriter, and his boss came in and said, "Who is this?" And they said, "This is Neil's wife, Ellyn. And what's she doing? She's looking for a job." He says, "Oh, you need to talk to George Curlin over at NIAID, the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease." So I did. I called him and he said, "What are you interested in?" And I explained I was interested in international health, infectious disease, epidemiology. He says, "You really need to talk to somebody at USAID. We do more medical research. If you want to do field operations, you need to talk to somebody at USAID." And he shared a couple of names and numbers. And so I called them, and within a fairly short period of time, I had been interviewed and found a couple of opportunities that looked good and picked one that was actually called a Data for Decision-Making project with what was the predecessor to USAID's Global Health Bureau. And it was right at the time of the child survival revolution when there was a huge push on immunization and oral rehydration therapy to reduce vaccine-preventable diseases and diarrheal disease in the developing world. And so I came in at a time when that was just taking off, and so was able to help craft some of those projects, to analyze their midterms, develop and design the follow-on projects, and really look at how we were implementing field programs around the world to better the health of children.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. Well, that's really interesting. And so what happened next? What was, I mean, you clearly you had quite a bit of overseas experience with the Peace Corps, but this was going to be quite a different challenge for you. What was the next stage?
Well, this particular job allowed me to fill a gap in my background. So, because I came in as a project manager of a child survival contract, I got to learn management, financing, budget. I learned how to develop consultancies in terms of references and all of the nuts and bolts that you need to have when you work with a development agency. And so my technical knowledge and my knowledge of international things and how to work in an international setting is useful if you want to be a subject matter expert. But in USAID, we're a donor funder. We fund programs. You have to understand the money side and how to get policies set and how to get all the documentation ready so that you can actually put the money behind the programs that you want to develop. And this job offered me that opportunity.
Yeah, and it sounds like you were a bit of a rarity. My thinking right now, hearing your story, is that you are a person who actually has an interest in disease eradication and public health and that sort of thing that typically you might expect someone with a scientific background to be involved in, but the logistics of making that happen with funding and knowing how to apply for it and find it and make it happen is typically, I'm thinking, not the sort of thing that you're prepared for during your education, undergraduate or even graduate education, for example. But they were ready to give you the training, and you were apparently a pretty good learner. Have I got that right?
Absolutely. I got on that right away and really started to understand how USAID worked, how contracts, grants, awards work, understanding the money, the budget cycles, all of that. But then also using my technical expertise to design things in a way that were going to make a difference.
I think that makes you a rare individual, that you were willing to embrace two relatively disparate disciplines, and you did it very well.
It has served me very, very well. We'll talk about that when we talk about my work in polio eradication, because not only do I manage the technical side, but also a huge financial component as well. The other thing that this job, first out of Peace Corps, offered me was the opportunity to learn about communication, media, things like that, how you get your message across. And I was fortunate enough to work on some of the USAID documentation for the World Summit for Children in 1990. And the press kit that we put together actually won an award at the time among government publications for one of the best press kits that year. With every job, I try to learn something that I didn't know before. And it helps prepare you for opportunities in the future. You never know when that one little thing you learn is going to become incredibly valuable for some opportunity in the future. Well,
you were clearly a gifted learner, and you also are a gifted interview guest, because you've just given me the perfect segue. And I do want to go into great detail. I would like for you to go into great detail about your work with polio eradication. Most of our audience, I think, will be people who have either careers in healthcare or some connection with healthcare, and there may be a few among them who are aware that polio is not gone in other parts of the world. So I'm just going to let you take it from there. How did you get interested in polio eradication, and what were the steps for how you got there?
It's been quite a journey. My second job out of Peace Corps was I was offered a fellowship to work within USAID's Latin America Bureau. And that was a really interesting experience. It was done through Johns Hopkins University, and I was called a Health and Child Survival Fellow. And I was responsible for a fairly large portfolio working in Central and South America. And my portfolio included things like nutrition, health and human rights, pharmaceuticals, breastfeeding, maternal health, maternal mortality. But it also included child survival and immunizations. And at the time, USAID was funding the Pan American Health Organization to do work in polio eradication in the Americas. And so I got to be part of those discussions and help manage the awards to PAHO, Pan American Health Organization, and learn about what they were doing in polio eradication. And I was fortunate enough to work closely with the man who is one of the most influential people in my life, Dr. Cira de Quadros, who was a brilliant Brazilian physician and really envisioned how to do polio eradication. He worked with Albert Sabin to think through what would be the steps for global eradication. And so USAID was helping to fund that and really test it out to see if it worked. And so I learned an enormous amount from him when I worked in our Latin America Bureau and was there during the whole certification part of that process. So how did countries actually prove that polio was gone? And that involved looking at polio surveillance. It looked at campaign quality, mass immunization campaigns. It looked at the factors of routine immunization, what the underlying immunity you would get from well baby immunization. And what are some of the factors that would inhibit us from actually stopping polio transmission? There was insecurity. There was the Sandinistas. There was the Shining Path that were blocking some of the efforts to vaccinate children.
When I hear things like an organized resistance to vaccination, I need a little explanation. Do you have any idea of what mindset is behind that nonsense?
The reasons vary, and I've worked now with many groups that are resistant or blocking access to vaccination. Most of the time, it is not because they actually oppose immunization. They oppose strangers coming into their area that they're trying to control as a rebel group or an anti-government group.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want people nosing around in what's happening there. They definitely don't want people going house to house, searching for kids because you don't know what else they're recording and reporting back on. So many of these rebel groups or anti-government groups are not necessarily anti-vaccine. It's really about field operations.
I see. So it's more a matter of concern about foreign ideologies that might be introduced along with the vaccine.
Sometimes, but
Yeah.
not so much. I mean, you can imagine being an anti-government group. You have weapons stashed away. You have people who are on wanted lists. You have other folks wanting to know sort of how well set up are these communities to fight against the government. It's more about intel gathering than it is about foreign ideas being introduced.
That's
And
so interesting.
This has been an issue for health workers working overseas for a long time, making sure there's a bright line, that there is no intelligence gathering during these periods when we're out doing public health. That is not what we're about. But the suspicions are deep and they don't know you, and it's just easier to bar access than to let people come in and vaccinate.
That's really fascinating, and I apologize for the interruption. Do go ahead.
No, it's a really important thing, and we'll come back to it because it's one of the key things I learned from Cira de Quadros is how to approach those situations and what you need to do to be successful. And I really learned a lot from him that I was able to apply later on, which I'll tell you about when we get to that point.
Great.
So in 1996, the U.S. Congress created the USAID Polio Eradication Initiative and provided us with our first tranche of specialized funding. And the agency was looking around for who could manage this new initiative. And so I was known in the agency for our work in polio in Latin America, for our work in immunization. They knew I understood financing and the earmark process and how congressional money works. I had been helping to manage grants to WHO, the World Health Organization, and UNICEF. And so all of those skills were really valuable when the agency needed a polio coordinator. And polio required not only knowledge of immunization, but surveillance and the laboratory network, communication, and public awareness about vaccines. And so the job of being the polio eradication coordinator for USAID really brought together many of the skills and lessons that I had gathered in the previous jobs in my career.
Mm-hmm. Tell us more. What was next? You're all the logistics are done. What's it like to be there and be on the front line?
Well, working with USAID has really been my dream job. I have a bipartisan congressional support. We have a budget. I have senior leadership that understands what we're trying to do. I work not only with WHO and UNICEF, but I also manage a network of NGOs and civil society organizations to work in immunization. And we're growing that to now include more than just vaccine preventable diseases, but also other pandemic threats and diseases of public health concern. We're growing community-based surveillance activities. We're promoting strongly evidence-based communication to overcome vaccine hesitancy. So it's a very rich portfolio, and I've been managing it since 1997, mostly through grants and agreements to, as I said, WHO and UNICEF and this consortium of non-governmental organizations. And since 96, we've put in almost $2 billion for polio eradication just through USAID that I've managed over my career.
That's a pretty successful project.
It's successful in the sense that it's a lot of money, but we've also seen very dramatic results in terms of polio around the world. So when eradication first started, there were 125 countries with poliovirus, almost 400,000 cases a year. All three types of wild virus were circulating. There's three types, 1, 2, and 3. And last year, there were only 2 countries with wild poliovirus and 5 documented cases in 2021. Wow.
That's got to make you feel pretty good.
It really is a remarkable program. We estimate that, again, since the beginning of eradication, we have prevented almost 20 million cases of childhood paralysis and vaccinate well over 500 million children a year against polio.
That is really amazing. And I'm hoping you'll tell us something about what was the experience like of being in these underdeveloped countries and living in those conditions and trying to do what you came to do. Did you find it difficult? Was the resistance demoralizing? What was the story?
In most of the places that I've been, people are very enthusiastic. It's rare to have money, political commitment, technical knowledge on how to do something this big. It was a big goal. And in the mid-90s, early 2000s, you could not generate more excitement when you were in the field. People welcomed you there. I was monitoring polio campaigns in dozens of countries, participating in disease surveillance reviews, working on communication, talking to communities. There was this can-do attitude at the time. And we started to see big declines in the virus. So the virus itself was telling us that we were being successful. And that was pretty remarkable. But then, as most big programs go, not everything goes according to plan, and you start bumping up against various obstacles. So in Nigeria in 2003, there was a lot of concern about the vaccine and whether it causes sterility or other problems. Was it spreading HIV? And the northern governors of Nigeria essentially put a halt to the polio program for a year until they could gather the evidence and understanding that the vaccine itself was not hurting people.
Do you have any idea where those notions came from?
They had been circulating for a while. There had been a test done in a lab in South Asia, I won't mention which country, that just thought they'd take a look at whether there were any hormones or anything like that in polio vaccines. So they did a test to look for it, but they did it at a bench in a lab that also did pregnancy testing. And so the potential for cross-contamination was high, and they published about it, and rumors take off and misinformation takes off. Sometimes it was truly just not understanding what was going on, and then other people amplify it quite intentionally as mis or disinformation. But there were other factors. It wasn't just about the myths and rumors. There were issues about the north and the south of Nigeria. The north is predominantly Muslim. The south is predominantly Christian. And who was running the program and who was being selected as the vaccinators? And was this an equitable program across the various tribal and religious groups? And what you begin to realize pretty quickly when you work on these global scales is that the epidemiology and science is one part of it. But the really important thing to focus on are the people-centered issues, the culture, household decision-making, perceptions of sort of what the West is doing. Is there equity among the various groups? And understanding these cultural and socioeconomic barriers are really the keys to success. Because you can't just say, take the vaccine, we know it works, it's a great vaccine, it's going to help your kids. That's not going to be enough.
Yeah.
And it's a tough lesson, and it's unique to every location. And so you need tailored messages, tailored approaches to be successful.
I'm wondering if you can reach back in your memory and think of an instance or two that was particularly memorable when there was maybe a watershed moment where you'd been struggling to get the message across, and it was seemingly just not going well, and then something happened that changed it all. Have you got anything like that you can share with us?
I do have a pretty interesting story, and it is one I'm very proud of, actually. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, it's one of the largest countries in Africa. It has some of the poorest populations, very remote, very isolated populations, and it's been at war for quite some time. And the polio program had been trying to get access in the eastern, very large eastern part of the country. Millions and millions of kids out there had not been vaccinated because of tribal fighting and rebel group fighting. And at the time, the U.S. ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo asked me if I would see what I could do to negotiate a ceasefire among the three main rebel groups in the Congo and see if I could broker a deal to get the kids vaccinated. And so I agreed, and, channeling what I had learned from Ciro de Quadros, went out to DRC, to the eastern part of the country. I came in through Goma and was able to meet with the three main rebel factions. So some in Goma, I met with Jean-Pierre Bemba up in Badalit, and Wamba de Wamba out near the Ugandan border. And I shared with them the issues about polio, that their children were getting paralyzed, that we had good vaccines, that would prevent them from getting this horrible paralysis, and explained what it is we wanted to do to organize mass campaigns for everybody in the eastern part of the country, but we needed their agreement to not fight on the days of the campaigns. And so going between them and really explaining and answering their questions, it was almost all about logistics. Who's coming in? What planes coming in? What vaccines coming in? They really wanted to understand all the aspects of the campaign preparation and who was going to be there. We identified what their roles and responsibilities were. We said what the international community's roles and responsibilities were. And on a handshake, I was able to get agreement from all of these three groups. And they agreed to allow the polio campaigns to go forward and that they would not fight. And within 6 weeks, we vaccinated 6 million children
Wow.
in DRC.
You must be some kind of talented negotiator, is all I can say. That I don't even know how to respond to that. 6 million. What a huge number. And you are rightfully proud.
I am very proud of that. I am really grateful to what I learned from Dr. De Quadros, the opportunities and the confidence that people had in me. I went in with no security. I went in with data. I went in with a desire to find a way forward that everybody could agree on. I was able to represent both the U.S. and the polio program at the time to deliver on our promises. And things actually went fairly smoothly. And so those ceasefires held for most of the next 15 years. That on the days of the polio campaigns, none of the groups were fighting. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of.
Well, that is one of the most remarkable stories that I think I have ever heard of with respect to dealing with people who are at war with one another, because I think, as we all know, it's hard to convince people in a warlike state of mind to listen to reason. So clearly, Ellyn, there is something about you that arises above that. And my goodness, congratulations to you for being able to pull that off. I have a philosophical question for you. The numbers that you gave me before are, to me, astounding in terms of the numbers of virus that we know about that remains in the world. Do you think that we will see the eradication of polio in our lifetime? And I'm a pretty old man, by the way.
As I said at the top, you have to be an optimist working in polio. We are very, very close to interrupting wild polio virus transmission right now, with 5 cases last year in some pretty isolated geographic areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan. There are many opportunities to vaccinate in the last remaining pockets. In the last couple of weeks, we were informed of a wild virus case in Malawi. And there's a big investigation now underway to figure out how it got to Malawi and to vaccinate kids along the eastern coast of Africa. But we have a good tool. We have a bivalent vaccine that's very good against type 1, which is wild virus type 1, which is the only wild virus circulating right now. So full interruption of wild type virus is very feasible in my mind. We know what to do, we know where it is, and we have the tools to do it.
Well, Ellyn, I do love to end a conversation on an optimistic note, and you certainly have given me great cause to be optimistic. I had no idea that the scale of the eradication over the past 25 years had been so profound, and I certainly think that has given us good reason to be optimistic. And with that, I'm going to close out the interrogation here, and we're going to move on to what's my favorite part of the program, and that is when I get out of the way and allow our guests to speak to us person to person, as it were. So I'm going to close my mic, and Ellyn Ogden is going to give us her personal prescriptions for success.
Thank you so much, Randy. I look back on sort of this path that I've taken, and what I was like as a young girl in growing up. My father was fairly strict, and you didn't really speak too much unless you were spoken to. You didn't challenge authority. You listened to what your elders were saying and your teachers were saying. And as I grew in my career, I realized that I could no longer sit there silently and listening. When I saw something or heard something that didn't make sense, the need to challenge assumptions, the need to speak up, the need to ask questions. And one of the things that I have really learned is to be respectful, but challenge authority, challenge underlying assumptions. Don't be afraid to speak your opinion if it's well reasoned and you really have honest questions about it. I learned a lot taking the Army's red teaming course, where they teach you how to be a good devil's advocate. And I think that that perspective is often missing as people get on the bandwagon and just start doing things because other people are doing them. So the need to challenge things, to look at things differently, it's okay to do that. I think it's been one of my most important lessons and the place that I've probably grown the most since I was very, very young. I think the second thing is that I've learned not to be so serious and to have fun and bring in my family and friends into my experience. When I was growing up, I was very serious, a very serious student. And it really wasn't until I got to Tulane and New Orleans where I met people that kind of pulled me out of the shell. And that allowed me to experience a lot of diversity. I got out of my comfort zone. I met with people that I would never have met with before. I got new experiences. I got to eat new foods. And then when I traveled internationally, all of that ability to be plopped down into a location you didn't know, you're not aware of their culture, but to feel comfortable, to ask questions, to understand the diversity around you, to build relationships outside of your own culture, to be yourself, to have fun. It's okay to joke around with people. You take the job seriously, but you're soft on people. And that has been a life lesson since I was growing up. So don't be too serious. Be yourself. Have fun. Seek diversity. Get out of your comfort zone. I think all of those things have, really contributed to my ability to be effective on the ground. You seize opportunities. The DR Congo moment I told you about, it's being a normal person in an extraordinary situation and knowing how to address and seize that moment when you can really make a difference, but you have to take that leap of faith forward. I had never done it before. I had heard about it. I can do this. I can make a difference here. And don't hold yourself back. You can make important contributions to this world if you seize the moment, seek the opportunities, and don't be afraid. Just be yourself. And I'll stop there with my journey and my prescription for success.
Well, Ellyn, thank you so much for sharing with us today. This has been very inspirational for me, and particularly your prescriptions for success. And we're all better off for having the opportunity to hear you. Before we go, I want to give you a chance to tell people where they can find you and more about you. So please go ahead and share what you will.
I think if you Google me, Ellyn Ogden, USAID polio, a lot of things will come up. I do have publications. I have been in some documentaries and so had done some other events. But what I value really is my relationships with the people that I've met. And so encourage all of you, learn if you can from anything that I have to share. And I do respond to emails and questions if I get them.
And I will add that it's Ellyn with a Y, Ellyn, Ellyn Ogden. And you certainly can learn a lot by Googling. And we'll have lots of information about you in the show notes that our listeners can consult as well. So once again, it has been a great pleasure to have a conversation with you. And I thank you so much for being with us.
A great pleasure. And, good luck to all of you out there. I know you're going to do big things.
Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, we really appreciate a review from you, and a 5-star rating helps us a lot. These ratings give our show much more visibility, and they help us reach more listeners. And if you'd like access to exclusive content, head on over to our Patreon page, where you can see membership-only material, including personal rapid-fire Q&A sessions with our guests and more. To be sure you never miss a future episode, you can also subscribe at our website, rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And while you're there, you can offer your very own personal prescription for success on SpeakPipe. As always, very special thanks to Ryan Jones, who created and performs the theme music for the show. And remember, be sure and fill your prescription for success with my next episode.